Good morning, everyone. This is Father Nate, missionary priest in Italy, and today is July 28th of 2024. Today we're celebrating the 17th Sunday in Ordinary Time, and our Gospel comes to us from the Gospel according to John, chapter 6, verses 1 through 15. Jesus went across the Sea of Galilee. A large crowd followed him because they saw the signs he was performing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. The Jewish feast of Passover was near. When Jesus raised his eyes and saw that a large crowd was coming to him, he said to Philip, "Where can we buy enough food for them to eat?" He said this to test him, because he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 200 days' wages worth of food would not be enough for each of them to have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what good are these for so many?" And Jesus said, "Have the people recline." Now there was a great deal of grass in that place. So the men reclined, about 5,000 in number. Then Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed them to those who were reclining, and also as much of the fish as they wanted. When they had had their fill, he said to the disciples, "Gather the fragments left over, so that nothing will be wasted." So they collected them, and filled 12 wicker baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves that had been more than they could eat. When the people saw the sign he had done, they said, "This is truly the prophet, the one who is to come into the world." Since Jesus knew that they were going to come and carry him off to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain alone. You know, brothers and sisters, I'm sure that most, if not all of us, have had the opportunity to buy something that's an imitation of the real thing. You know, for instance, maybe we've seen a genuine imitation leather jacket, or a beautiful fur coat made out of polyester, which would be a strange sort of animal. Now again, these products aren't necessarily bad things, but they do certainly fall short of the real deal, the authentic thing. Now in today's Gospel, John the Evangelist gives an opportunity to reflect on the difference between the real deal and imitations of it. He presents us with a miracle that we've probably heard many times before. From 5 loaves and 2 fishes, Jesus is able to feed a multitude. And not only to feed them, but to give food in such abundance that the leftovers alone are far more than what they started with. Yet there's also something very important at the end of today's Gospel. Now, the people are so excited about being fed that they want to make Jesus their king. But what does Jesus do? He takes off. He leaves. Now, the Greek word that John uses can mean to take refuge from some danger, or to flee from some enemy, to shun the company of others, to avoid being seen. What Jesus does then is a serious thing. It's interesting, though, when we think about it, because Jesus usually doesn't shun the company of others or take refuge from danger. He stayed put when they came to arrest him in Gethsemane instead of taking off. He touched and healed lepers and the sick, people whom others would run away from. When the woman came to anoint his feet, he didn't run away. He stayed put, even though he knew what a scandal it would be for the Pharisees. So what Jesus does here in today's Gospel is a very important lesson for us. It's a lesson that centers on what it means for Jesus to be a king, and this lesson touches on almost every aspect of our lives. So today we can consider just 2 things. First, the sort of king that Jesus isn't, and second, the sort of king that Jesus is. So the sort of king Jesus didn't want to be made, and the sort of king Jesus means when he tells Pilate that he is a king. So first, what sort of king did Jesus refuse to be? Fulton Sheen says Jesus didn't want to be a bread king, the sort of king who provides only for the material needs of the people. Now, for most people, this is enough, to have a full stomach, enough money, whatever. That's good enough for them. It's not controversial, there's no hard teachings, no strained relationships, and no one gets offended. However, there's at least 2 problems with the people trying to make Jesus their king. First, they want to limit him to being a king of this earth. And secondly, They want to crown him. That is, they want to show that it's the masses who give Jesus his power and authority. So we can say there's two problems here. There's a problem with what they want Jesus to be and how they want him to receive it, how they want him to be that thing. So first, the masses want Jesus to be a king of this material realm. They want him to fill stomachs and heal the sick, and to stop there. Now, there's many people who think that this is what the church is about. She's just another organization who helps take care of the poor. And yeah, it's true that the church does and should take care of the poor and needy. I mean, Christ himself told us that the need to care for the least of our brothers and sisters. However, these good deeds aren't simply what the church does. Rather, they flow from her overwhelming love for Christ and his people, the people he redeemed with his blood. If our brothers and sisters were valuable enough for Christ to die for them, then they're valuable enough for us to care for. It's this that pushes the church to care for the poor, the sick, the unborn, the handicapped, and everyone whom the world sees as expendable. In an interview with St. Mother Teresa of Calcutta, a journalist asked the nun what she did for the dying, for whom nothing more could really be done, the sickest of the sick. And Mother Teresa replied, "We can at least leave them with the impression of something important, that there are people willing to truly love them, because the dying are also children of God, and deserve to be loved as much, or maybe even more, than anyone else. For a bread king, this love is impossible. It's even unimaginable. When we become too concerned about the material, we forget the spiritual. We can ask ourselves, do we really love Jesus? And because of that, do we really love our neighbors? Do we really try to take care of the poor, the forgotten, the least among us? Because they too are God's children. The second problem is that the masses want Jesus to be a king on their terms and not God's. This is very common today. When people try to reduce Jesus to a feeling or an emotion, they want Jesus to be a bumper sticker and not the beginning, middle, and end of their lives. They want Jesus on their terms and not on his. We see this in people who try to use Jesus to justify anything imaginable, from abortion to euthanasia to the destruction of the family. This is to crown Jesus with, using those words of Fulton Sheen, the tinsel crown and tin sword of popularity. Rather than remake Jesus in a way that we like, we can ask ourselves, do we really try to understand Jesus' teachings and those of his church? Do we read the catechism and try to see why the church teaches what she does? This leads us to our second point. If Jesus isn't a bread king, well then what sort of king is he? His kingdom is not of this world, he tells Pilate. We've already seen that his kingdom is not of bread, but of the Father's will and a love for souls. That is Christ's principal aim, to seek and to save the lost, to bring souls to heaven. It's true that God is love and that Christ loves everyone. In fact, he loves them so much that he wants them to get to heaven, to be there with him forever. He gives us the church and his teachings, not to be mean or to impose something on us, but to show us how to love him so as to get to heaven. If I want to drive from Dallas to New York, for instance, driving south isn't going to get me there, no matter how well-intentioned or well-meaning I might be. Getting to heaven is way more complicated than a drive from Dallas to New York, and so that's why Christ gives us the directions and indications on how to get there. Love for Christ the King is, in a sense, like the love for a husband or a wife. It must be exclusive, or it's just not love. However, just as getting married isn't about all the millions of potential spouses that you have to reject, choosing to follow Christ isn't about the many things that we're not supposed to do. In other words, just like marriage isn't about the million no's you have to say to all the other potential spouses out there, but rather about the one big yes to the beloved, so too following Christ isn't about the million sins we're asked not to commit, but about the big yes we give to God, from which some no's follow as a consequence. Love for Christ the King, also like marriage we can say, implies sacrifice. Jesus' popularity was never the same after he refused the tinsel crown. Many of his followers left after hearing the Bread of Life discourse, and yet Jesus doesn't chase after them or change his teachings. Neither can we. The question for us, then, is whether we embrace the cross of Christ, whether we take his yoke upon our shoulders, or do we let his teachings become a stumbling block? Now, in his book, Fulton Sheen makes the following point, and it's something that we can reflect about through the entire week. He writes this: how close the masses were to salvation. They wanted life. He wanted to give life. The difference was in their interpretation of life. Is it the business of Christ to win followers by elaborate social programs? This is one form of life. Or is it the business of Christ to be willing to lose all the stomach-minded at the cost of reaching the few with faith, to whom will be given the bread of life? Today and throughout this week, as we meditate on what it means for Christ to reign in our lives, let's ask for the grace through the intercession of Mary, Queen of Heaven and Earth, to truly love Christ the King and to seek the life that he brings.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed hearing the gospel and homily, I invite you to share it with someone you know who may also find it rewarding, and also to subscribe to the Catholic Voice channel. Please see in the description below if you would like to receive a text message for each daily gospel and homily. Please also keep our missionary priests throughout the world in your prayers. Thank you, and God bless.